I've always found the thrill of fireworks comes with embracing the essence of temporary beauty. Once they're fired out into the world, they fade as quickly as they explode and achieve their purpose. But sometimes, the unique color, shape, or sheer density of that explosion can create an irreplaceable experience. Now, how do you satiate that newfound longing? How do you capture something that could only happen once? Well, you can't. It's a fruitless endeavor, but no matter how much others might tell us not to, that won't stop some of us from trying.
Yo.
Haruko's English voice actress, Kari Wahlgren, best described the character as the embodiment of the id. Nothing but raw, unfiltered emotion and chaos. While she might have made an impact on the lives of the characters as well as the audience watching, all she really cared about was getting what she wanted, regardless of the consequences. And much like chasing fireworks, what she wants is an entity who can be seen as synonymous with any romanticized idea that will always exist outside our grasp. In the original Fooly Cooly, Atomisk represents maturity viewed through the eyes of a child, right down to the symbol on his beak. He's an all-powerful being that seemingly can't be tied down, but like a child playing with toys she can't have, that just makes Haruko want to capture him even more. The only time we see Haruko lose her composure is at the end, when Naota, who comes to terms with his own maturity, harnesses the power before she does, and I think it's here we see that rebellious nature of the original creators revealing themselves at their most visceral. We've outlined this before in previous videos, but director Kazuya Tsurumaki and his team were arguably just a bunch of very talented guys who wanted to recapture the magic of their childhoods by filling Fooly Cooly with the things that they liked growing up, such as guitars, cats, and a myriad of pop cultural references. That isn't to say they didn't want to make something that wouldn't leave a lasting impact, but the approach behind Fooly Cooly always seemed to come from a place inherently selfish and fleeting, mirroring Haruko's pursuits of Atomisk. Here we are almost 20 years later, and that reverence still somehow remains consistent under slightly different circumstances.
Round 2.
Humor me for a second, but if Haruko can best be described as a peek into the mindset and intentions of whatever creative team is in charge of penning her, then how she's utilized in Progressive might be indicative of a sequel displaying a level of self-awareness about its own existence that is far more competent than what a lot of people have been giving it credit for. At the end of episode 1, when Haruko makes her grand reveal, what follows is her whole class losing their minds alongside shots of social media progressively getting more and more incomprehensible, a perfect reflection of the real-world hype surrounding Progressive's airing on Toonami. That isn't to say we weren't critical or cautious about a network buying the Fooly Cooly brand and attempting to capitalize on its appeal, but the novelty of seeing Haruko again in all her nonsensical glory after so many years was intoxicating. Eventually, though, that euphoria runs its course, becoming replaced with anger and rejection. There comes a point where we just want the series to go away and leave us alone because we feel like we know what it's doing. Kinda like how some of Progressive's main characters start catching on to Haruko.
And that's why I can't go with you.
In Season 1, she was a force of nature that left a trail of destruction in her wake, and while that does still hold true here, in Progressive it's almost like she's an antagonist, permeating an air of sneaky manipulation that might be indicative of what we're expecting from the showrunners themselves. And just like how Haruko needs to come to terms with the fact that Atomisk isn't meant to be obtained, Progressive needs to acknowledge the futility of trying to recapture the magic of the original.
Shut up! I'm sick of hearing you talk about him! When I want something, I get it! I'll do what I need to make sure he sees me!
You're going to fail.
Upon my first viewing, I assumed Jinyu's inclusion in the show was incredibly basic and surface level. She's the ego to Haruko's id, and is constantly confronting her with what she doesn't want to hear. However, if Haruko is supposed to be a stand-in for the creators, then her relationship with Jinyu takes the form of an entirely different internal conflict.
You've already gotten what you wanted once before. It's time you quit. Just give up.
What can serve as an impetus for Haruko to acknowledge her relationship to Atomisk can also be seen as the show acknowledging how pointless its endeavors actually are. Progressive is warning itself about how it's doomed to fail, commenting in real time about how it's unable to understand the very thing that it's pursuing. You can't constrain and exploit something that came from such a personal place, because doing so would go against the reason why you fell in love with it in the first place. And if you watch the series, then you know that Haruko doesn't take being called out so well. Instead of acknowledging this voice of reason and coming to a compromise, Haruko consumes Jinyu in an attempt to silence her, blazing forward while reveling in her own childish pursuit, and I feel like what comes soon after is just as telling of a wider meta-narrative.
You and I need to talk.
At the beginning of episode 5, right after she thinks she suppressed that part of her, one of the students that was initially seduced by Haruko, a lens for the audience, tries to strike her down using the guitar that Jinyu left behind. A remixed version of I Think I Can, a track that plays during the climax of the original FLCL, is the background music for this scene, and for a second, it almost feels like the original and Progressive are supporting our efforts to put a stop to this sequel before it has a chance to finish for real. But while he might get in a few hits, Haruko herself frames the whole scene as a pointless effort. After all, Progressive wouldn't have even come to be if that more rational part took over. And the cherry on top is that she chastised Ide about needing to swing his own bat. Think about it for a second. What we're left with here is a character that tries to take advantage of everyone and everything she can get her hands on in order to accomplish her goals, lecturing someone else about relying on borrowed power. All while arrogantly making it seem like she knows better by using a metaphor that was developed in the original show. That is hypocrisy at its finest, yet at no point can I say it's inconsistent or out of character. And if I'm right about this show being one giant meta-commentary, then that's really clever. FLCL Progressive manages to have its cake and eat it too, by making all of these parallels fall perfectly in line with the motivations of the characters that are being used for the sake of commenting on the insurmountable task of producing a sequel to a massively beloved classic. In fact, this could explain why it took me more than one viewing to put all of this together, despite the fact that the show more or less spells it out for us right at the end.
The fact that you can't catch it is what makes you want to chase it. The fact that you can't reach it is what makes you want to chase it.
You are correct.
Of course, the inherent problem with this dishonest relationship the show is crafting with the viewer is that it's very easy to question the intent behind every single aspect of the show's presentation. At the bequest of the original team, the new staff working on Progressive were apparently given full creative control, and with every episode having its own director, on paper this seems like the perfect setup for artistic experimentation. Space Dandy had a similar setup, a show that seemed like an unrestrained, almost nonsensical celebration of everything, spearheaded by one of the most well-known series directors in Japan. In many ways, that feels more like a spiritual successor to FLCL than the actual sequel, an idea that I hope to go into more detail about at some point in the future. A lot of people compare Season 1 to a music video with spontaneity and visual changes to match the crude, rustic style of the creators. Even when limited animation was used, it never felt cheap. And when you combine all of that with the crazy and rebellious sound of the Pillows who provided the soundtrack, then the end result could best be described as a very powerful, visceral experience, one that few anime have managed to imitate before or since. This is why episode 5 is hands down one of the most memorable parts of Progressive, because it's the closest the show gets to displaying that same level of creativity. Every scene has some visual distinction to it with enough room to breathe, and even some previous artistic staples are turned on their heads. The manga scenes from Season 1 that were once loud, aggressive, and arguably kinda pointless make a comeback as something that's much more intimate, deliberate, and personal. If the rest of the season was like this, it's possible the series would have received far less backlash. Instead, what we got was something that most of the time feels far too standard and uniform for a 6-episode series that's been in development for at least the past 3 years. Colors can feel muted with a distinct lack of visual flair, and some frames are poorly animated or just straight up missing in a way that doesn't feel like it's on purpose. Maybe this was all done to represent how visually hollow Progressive's attempts are, showing moments of promise but ultimately failing to show it understands the original? Or maybe that's all just a convenient excuse for a rushed project that had more scheduling and monetary issues than we were led to believe. There are various other key moments throughout the entire series where versions of the Season 1 soundtrack will play, but is all of this a conscious business move because the creators don't have enough confidence in the new series and wanted the safety of playing off of viewer nostalgia? Or is this done to show how mismatched those older tracks are with the slower tone and pacing of this new season? We may never know the answer to any of these questions, but arguably that spirit of not knowing was part of the original Fooly Cooley's appeal.
It's a me type of thing, a dreamy type of thing.
A dream! A dream! What is the reason we dream? Could it be because it is called a dream? There are dreams while we sleep, and dreams while we're awake. We dream whether we're sleeping or awake. I have a dream. I dream that I woke up from a dream.
Let's go.
We don't know it's supposed to be a commentary, a deconstruction, or a reference for the sake of a reference, and I think that's what helped everything age so well. We're still discussing these things and the impact they had on us to this day, which can make it hard to accept anything else. In our current climate of media consumption, there's a solid argument to be had about entertainment defined by its ability to be self-aware, and whether or not those works constitute any artistic merit.
Rolling on the next take!
In a world filled with greedy business executives trying so hard to placate to our past and exploit nostalgia for the sake of making a quick buck, all that ends up doing is making us long for that time even more. Things were simpler back then, and we wish we could go back and lock ourselves away in a past that doesn't try to hurt us. I can't speak for anybody else, but personally, I feel like Progressive earns at least a little bit of my good faith, and a lot of that has to do with how the bigger picture relates to Hitomi.
Morning.
When Hitomi's father left home, she uses the headphones that he gave her as an excuse to shut out the world around her. If she can't be influenced by outside forces, then she won't grow up, and she can stay the same little girl for her dad when he eventually returns home. Now this might be a bit of a stretch, but I've always found Hitomi's attitude towards the world around her as very familiar, since I'm sure we've all come across people who glorify a particular thing or time period in their lives, to the point where they want to shut out any other noise that might even remotely try to change their mind otherwise. In fact, you could even argue that Hitomi is analogous to a lot of the hardcore veterans of the anime community who glorify shows like Fooly Cooley and refuse to accept anything else.
Son of a...
But before everyone gets angry, I don't think the show is condemning its audience for appreciating the original. Rather, I think Progressive is condemning itself for the sake of arriving at a much larger point. The underlying theme of Fooly Cooley Progressive seems to be that of acceptance, with Haruko and Hitomi both representing two extreme sides of the same problem. Haruko wants to obtain and be something that she can't, using every trick in the book to make it happen, while Hitomi wants to preserve what she once had and literally doesn't want to be anything. Of course, that's not how adolescence works. Hell, that's not how the world works. We can't always throw caution to the wind and frantically chase after something that can only happen once. And we can't just stop time and run away because all beautiful things must eventually fade. The answer, like most things, can be found somewhere in the middle. There's a difference between learning from the past and getting stuck in it. Part of growing up is realizing the difference. Haruko is still out there chasing Animus because that's the beauty of their relationship. Always chasing, yet never reaching. While Hitomi never says she's going to forget her father. In fact, she's still probably waiting for him. She's just not letting that longing get in the way of her being happy in the moment, and neither did the creators of Fooly Cooley. Whether we like it or not, the original is never coming back, because it's something that could only be made by those particular people when they were feeling nostalgic for those particular things during that particular time in their lives. These guys were chasing their own fireworks, those fleeting moments that they thought were cool and made something just as memorable for so many other people. Now there's nothing else for them to say, and I think that's why they never came back.
If you are unable to draw fireworks, well then... What? Try shooting one in the air.
Never lose the thrill of chasing down those moments, and never stop relishing in how they define you, because someday, you'll get the chance to make your own firework and have just as big of an impact on somebody else. Now, I could be giving this show far more credit than it deserves, and I feel like that's a sentiment that's going to pop up a lot on this channel. To me, Fooly Cooley Progressive isn't just a sequel. It's a love letter to what came before it, and a reminder of how much more we all think we're capable of. It might not be as impressive or impactful as the original, but sometimes, an innocent drawing of fireworks can have its own beauty to speak of. Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed the video. It went through a lot of rewrites and a few theories needed to be cut for the sake of staying focused. However, this video was still an absolute joy to make and I'm happy with how it turned out. If you're curious about what our creative process is like or our other thoughts on the show, consider becoming a patron in order to gain access to scripts, video commentaries, and even a special Discord server. Special thanks to Seth Phillips, JR Pictures, Regan Carriere, and Unknown Secret 1000 for donating already. Regardless of whether you agree or disagree with my findings, please let me know what your thoughts are on the aforementioned shows in the comments down below. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time.
Do whatever you want, 'cause I'll be doing the same.